Who are the Central Division's biggest X Factor players for the 2021-2022 season? We find out today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild. Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, Locked On Wild is available and free to download on all podcast platforms that you typically listen to podcasts. So make sure to check us out as your first listen every day. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Alex Micheletti joins the show, and we're talking X Factor players for the Central Division teams. Which player could swing teams' fortunes for the 2021-2022 season? My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wilds, veteran of over 10 years of Minnesota sports coverage, including the last couple of seasons covering exclusively your Minnesota Wild. Happy to be with you on a Friday edition of the show. Joined by Alex Micheletti, our guest for today's show and a regular frequenter of Locked On Wild. Alex had a chance, as the listening audience can see, to take part in the 10,000 Takes Invitational yesterday out at Bunker Hills. Just want to give those guys a shout out too, just to start here. Amazing event, tremendously successful, and obviously helping out the Give 16 Foundation, Jason and Carly Zucker. Amazing the work that those two are doing for the hockey community. And so really glad to be a part of it. Had a great time, and we're just going to hang out and enjoy a Friday here.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're so close to hockey. I mean, we got college hockey starting this weekend, and it was nice to see some Wild get in there in preseason, albeit not against all the big guns, no McKinnon, but yeah, fun to. I was actually in the car on the way back to my apartment and got to listen to Tom and Joe, who's filling in now as the voice of the Wild. So really happy for him getting a chance to be the NHL play-by-play guy on the radio. So yeah, it's fun. I can't wait for these the divisions to be back to normal and see how the Wild can do against some, I think, tougher competition than what they had last year against those Pacific squads.
Yeah, that is for sure. They're going to have the gauntlet this year. Then again, everybody will, but it will be fun to see how they stack up amongst the rest of the NHL competition. You mentioned the preseason game. Obviously, the Wild end up losing by a score of 6-4. Didn't have a chance with, birdie every hole pretty much out of Bunker Hills. So didn't have a chance to watch or listen to the preseason action for the Wild. But from what I gather, Adam Beckman had another strong showing. And, just to kind of touch on this quickly before we move on to our topic for today, he's making that choice of who fills out the bottom end of this Wild roster very difficult. And if he just continues to kind of push like this, he's probably going to get the call.
Watch out for Brandon Duheim too. Billy G continues to bring up his name. So that's another guy that I think is making a big push. He was college hockey guy at Providence. And so, yeah, that's another name. And let's make it really interesting for some of the veterans that are on that you would think are penciled in on that fourth line, giving them a little pressure. And then, Kyle Rao's always there to hang around as the in-between guy. So,
yeah. Kyle Rao is just like the eternal depth guy, and gets a chance when players are injured, and so he'll I'm sure get that chance again this year. But if I was leaning one way or the other, really like to see Beckman get the chance, and
he's cheap. I mean, so that helps, especially when you're trying to fill out a roster.
100%. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about two teams X factors here in segment 1 of the show. Then we'll talk about 3 more Central Division teams in the second segment, 3 more Central Division teams in the final segment, for a grand total of 8 teams in the Central Division. And so makes sense that we would start with the Minnesota Wild here for this one. And I mean, if we're talking X factor, like make or break players, there are certainly a number of players who could fall into this category. I kind of look at it as like, if you subtract a particular player, what sort of impact is that going to have on the Wild's success? And I'm going to go, for me, I'm going to go with Eriksson Ek for X Factor player for the Wild. I just think, like, for the center depth that this team has, wanting him to play that number 1 center this season, if he is successful, if he has a season like he did this past year, and maybe does a little better than that, this Wild team's going to be very dangerous. If he kind of regresses offensively, we could be looking at a long season. So mine would be Eriksson Ek. Do you agree, or do you have another name that is more of an X Factor player for you from the Wild?
Yeah, that's a great pick. Especially now looks like they have him penciled in as the number 1 center. So that is a ton of responsibility. Not only offensively, but also defensively. And he's going to be going up against some great centers. The Jonathan Taveses of the world. You got to win faceoffs, and you're going to be counted on. So we'll see if he's up to the task for being the number 1 center. If that's for sure the route they're going to go. I would say Cam Talbot. This team might be weaker defensively without Carson Soucy and Suter. So he's going to have to play. He's going to have to battle harder, I think, too, against these central teams. I think a lot of them can score more than the teams they faced out west. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Dallas can really score. They got studs up and down their lineup. Chicago, always dangerous. St. Louis, always dangerous. And so I think Cam's gonna have to repeat how he played last year, and it's gonna be a lot more challenging for him. So I think he's definitely up to the task, and let's see if he can do it multiple years in a row.
Yeah, 100%. Let's move on to the probably favorite at this point to win the Central Division. The almost said Chicago, the Colorado Avalanche, and a lot of different players you can go here. Honestly, for me, this was a pretty easy choice because this has been something that I've kind of been questioning the entire offseason so far. It's Darcy Kemper for me. Like, if he is able to play at a similar level to Grubauer, then they're going to be just fine. But if his play kind of tails off, or he plays like he did at times with Arizona, that team is not going to win as many games as they did. So I think, and honestly, like, we may be able to narrow it down to, like, Darcy Kemper is the one player that could single-handedly swing the division. Like, if he's real bad, I don't know if Chicago can win ever. I did it again. I don't know if Colorado can win every game like 6-5 or 7-6. I don't know if they have that in them. So if he can't give them consistent goaltending every night, I think they're going to kind of play themselves out of it. So Darcy Kemper is mine for the Avs. Who's your X Factor player?
Yeah, Darcy's a great pick. Goaltending has always held them back. And a guy that I've always enjoyed, and I think is going to be really needed, is Sam Girard in the back end, defenseman. You know what you're getting with Makar all the time, but Girard needs to step up, especially since they lost Ryan Graves too in that trade. Because they with their salary cap, they needed to create space for re-signing Landeskog, and so I think Sam Girard is such a key player. He plays power play, penalty kill. He's a smaller guy, so not as big as Ryan Graves, but Makar needs help back there. Their defense in the playoffs was not great, and Vegas toyed with them And so
Yeah, they did.
yeah. So he needs to step up and help Makar, because Makar could win the Norris every season if he wanted
Right.
to. So they need help on the back end, and I think he's the guy. And they're going to have to help Kemper too, because
Yeah.
like you said, Kemper's a roller coaster. Sometimes he looks like a Vezina Trophy winning goalie, and then others it's awful.
Yeah.
It's hard to watch. He'll give up 5 or 6, and you're like, what are we getting here?
What's happening? So
Yeah.
that's a great pick. Tell you what, we will continue to look at X Factor players throughout the Central Division. Alex Micheletti joining today's episode of Locked On Wild. More coming up after this. All right, hockey fans, I'm going to give you the inside track on fantasy hockey. It's Fantrax. Fantrax's free NHL Fantasy Hockey League Manager is the most customizable, easy to use, and feature-rich platform in the industry. You can sign up for free today, and as a special offer for Locked On Wild fans, you'll be entered to win an official NHL signed Nathan MacKinnon jersey. Just go to fantrax.com/lockedon to sign up. The top dynasty fantasy hockey platform in the industry, Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. You can go deep with the ultimate keeper and dynasty leagues, create a simple redraft league, or even a customizable best ball league with up to 2,000 teams. Among the most trusted names in fantasy sports since 2008, offering hockey, football, baseball, basketball, college football, golf, soccer, and NASCAR. If there's anything lacking in your current fantasy league manager, Fantrax likely has it. Fantasy sports don't sleep, and neither does Fantrax, with seasons running 365 days a year. There's a reason why fantasy players who use Fantrax make it permanent for all of their fantasy leagues. So you can sign up for free today to be entered to win an official NHL signed Nathan MacKinnon jersey. Simply go to fantrax.com/lockedon and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/lockedon. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. This fall, Built Bar wants to help you celebrate freedom of choice. Did you know Built Bar has an amazing assortment of delicious flavors, including coconut, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream, and German chocolate? The only thing missing on that list for the quintessential fan of fall is pumpkin spice. Maybe it's coming sometime. Just keep an eye out. If you're not sure, though, which flavor is your favorite, raspberry is mine for what it's worth. You can grab a mix box, which contains 2 each of those flavors. Not only are Built Bars amazingly delicious, they are also healthy for you. Each bar contains 17 to 18 grams of protein, ranges in calories from 130 to 180, contains only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. Amazing tasting, amazingly healthy. What's not to like about Built Bar? So head to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off of your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Seth Topol hanging out with Alex Micheletti. We're looking at X Factor players for the Central Division. Let's go to the Chicago Blackhawks next. Chicago made some very splashy moves this offseason, a big trade or two, also a huge contract extension signed. I'm not going with any of those guys, though. I am going with one player in particular who is trying to come all the way back from several injuries. I'm talking about Mr. Jonathan Toews. I think if he can be back even close to what he was before, it's going to go a long way for this squad. And so Jonathan Toews is mine. Who is your Blackhawks X Factor player?
Seth, great minds think alike. I was going to say Jonathan Toews too. I'll get to another guy here in a second, but Toews, he played 22 minutes the other night. They didn't expect him to play that much, but they were on the power play and he was winning big draws, and so they played him a ton. He had a shootout goal too. he looked great. He's such an amazing player, and he was missed tremendously with that team and with his leadership. He's the Tom Brady of the NHL. When he's on the ice, he commands respect. The guys on the ice play at a different level. He's the captain of the Chicago Blackhawks. That's a huge deal. And without him, they sorely missed him. Another guy you could throw out there is Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean,
Yeah.
what a season last year he had with Vegas, and then winning the Vezina. He's near the end of his career, and he's been playing lights out. And if you watched the Chicago Blackhawks last season, goaltending was an absolute nightmare. They had Malcolm Subban out there a lot, and he was a nightmare. They had the young guy out there too, the Finnish kid. But the goaltending has not been great since Corey Crawford left. That was a huge move by Bowman. He looked like he could be fired soon, and so for him to make a move like that and to not have to give up anything
Right.
for a guy that just won the Vezina, that's a huge deal. So we'll see how quick he gets used to playing for Chicago, but he's a gigantic X factor of them getting back in the playoffs and trying to make a run.
Yeah, that's a great list. Chicago is just such a interesting team coming into this year because it feels like, if player X, Y, and Z do this, they're going to be great. And if not, they're going to be terrible. And
Right.
Speaking of that formula, I think that encapsulates the Winnipeg Jets. If the player that I'm about to mention has a great season, they'll be okay. They'll kind of scrap it together. If this player does not play well, they are in major trouble. And I, of course, am talking about Connor Hellebuyck because he is that team. Like, as he goes, they go. And if he continues to do what he does, which is basically just be in net every night and just continue to dominate, if he does that again, like I said, they're going to be fine. But if he slips a little bit and his performance kind of struggles, well, that team's going to as well. Because I was just looking through their roster, and I don't think I realized how much of a mess it is. Like, yikes. So it's got to be Hellebuyck for me because who else is there?
Yeah, I mean they've they've struggled defensively, and they've never really replaced Dustin Byfuglien. They still haven't. My X factor, and Hellebuyck was a great choice. I mean, he single-handedly had them beat Edmonton. I mean, he really shut down McDavid and Draisaitl near the end of that series. But a guy that is criminally underrated is Kyle Connor. That guy can score 30 in his sleep, and he has to set the tone for them. He has to be good in the postseason and continue to play at a high level because they really need him. You know what you're getting in Mark Scheifele, you know what you're getting in Blake Wheeler, but if Kyle Connor can get you 30, 35, that's really going to help that team a lot. And I've always liked the way he plays. I'm a college hockey guy, obviously, and so he played at Michigan, and so it's fun to root for a guy like that. So that would be my X factor for the Winnipeg Jets.
Excellent. Final team before we take our final pause of today's show, the St. Louis Blues. We're also a weird team this year. Odd kind of roster construction, but this was an easy one for me as well because his situation with the team has not been worked out yet. It's just, I guess, going to lead to him playing after demanding a trade. I got to go with Vladimir Tarasenko. Like, if he plays, he is going to give that team a gear that could make them into a very pesky playoff team. But if he decides, you know what, I don't want to be here. Like, that's going to cause a distraction for that team, and it's just going to lead to a mess. So Vladimir Tarasenko is my X Factor player for the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, mine would be Colton Parayko. He just signed that massive contract, and they need him to be a top pairing defenseman,
Yeah.
dominant guy. When they won the Stanley Cup, he was a gigantic factor in them winning and beating Boston. He's such an amazing player, and he kind of reminds me of a young Chris Pronger with just
Ooh.
how big his size is. And Chris Pronger, played in St. Louis. Just he's such an impressive player. Again, another college hockey guy with Alaska Fairbanks. But yeah, he changes the game with his size. He just beats up on forwards and wears them out. And that's why St. Louis is always in the mix, is because of how defensive their structure is, and just wearing out teams and how big their defensemen are. So I would say Colton Parayko, you got your money now, and let's see you prove it and continue to be a force back there for the Blues.
I hope people are paying attention to the order in which we're doing these teams. I don't know if it has anything to do with maybe what I think the standings will be. That
Good
might be,
foreshadowing.
yeah, that might be a little bit of a tease, but we will finish up the list of X Factor players for the Central Division. More to come here on today's episode of Locked On Wild. BetOnline.ag is back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for another football season. And as always, BetOnline.ag is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, BetOnline.ag continues to be the number one source for everything football. So head over to BetOnline.ag on your laptop or mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. That's betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. Betonline.ag, where the game starts. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen of the day. Seth Topol and Alex Micheletti. We're doing X Factor players for the Central Division and finishing up with the final three teams. If you've been paying attention throughout the course of the episode today, you probably know who those are. We will start with the Dallas Stars, and looking at just a whole bunch of factors with this Dallas team. I mean, one of the most unlucky teams probably of last season with all the injuries that they dealt with. They had, they had that blizzard that led to a game being postponed and I think eventually canceled. It was at least postponed. But then they dealt with COVID. They dealt with injuries. They dealt with every possible thing you can think of. And yet here they are back trying to kind of get things back on track. And so, I look at, again, and I don't want to, I tried not to fall into like the goalie position for a lot of these, because honestly, that position will make or break every team in the NHL. But I feel like with Dallas, especially with what they went through, Anton Khudobin, is a guy that could really hop back in and help that team. I mean, you're sitting with I guess the only prospect they have in the system is Jake Ettinger. And so beyond that, I mean, you just have kind of this hodgepodge of guys that they're just begging for somebody to step up and take that starting spot. And so I think if he does, that's going to help Dallas out considerably. If not, maybe not the end of the world, but I think he's a guy that can really impact the fortunes of this team if he plays well and takes that spot and just runs with it.
Yeah, the team loves him. He's a great locker room guy.
He's
Russian,
a character.
He keeps it light. So yeah, that's a great pick. For me, it's got to be Tyler Seguin.
Yeah.
that guy, when he's on, he's a top I would say top 8, top 9 player in the league. They really missed his goal scoring. He came back for a couple games. He scored right away. So if he's healthy, watch out, because he makes that team so much better and gets them going. He gets Jamie Benn going too, which I think even he would admit that his game hasn't been where it's been in the past. Especially with the money he's making. Sagan too. So, and with how good their back end is, watch out, Dallas, if they get the goaltending, like you said.
On to the Nashville Predators, and Nashville's such a weird team. I feel like I say this for a lot of teams, but like, look at that roster. Like, they massively overachieved last year, and I don't get the sense that they can do it again. And so I'm going to, for my X Factor player, I'm going to key in on one of the guys that you could call like the veteran leader of this team, which is weird because he's not all that old. I'm going with Mikael Granlund because they need somebody to like grab the reins of that thing, kind of like he did last year. They need somebody to do it again and just say, I'm going to go score 25 goals, 30 goals, and just lead this team. And so Granlund's my pick here, but honestly, like, and maybe this is where like you turn the head coach in the X factor, where it's like, can they get the same level of play from this team that they did last year and kind of make a run? I'll go with Granlund, but like, again, if you're not familiar, go look at the roster because it's
gross.
Something. Yeah.
I don't know what David Poile was, what they were doing with their offseason. I mean, they get rid of they're probably their second best defenseman in Ryan Ellis, in flipping to Chuck Fletcher in Philly. And then you get rid of Victor Arvidsson too, who was one of your best goal scorers, guy that was actually putting up production on that gross team. And this is hard. Nashville's the hardest out of all of these for the Central Division. I'm going to go with Matt Duchene. He's got a gigantic contract there. He's on this team to score, and he's got to get back to the way he played in Colorado. I don't know what happened or what's going on with him. It's just like Granlund too, extremely inconsistent. And now with with a lot of those guys off the team, he's going to have to. Both of those guys are going to have to help Philip Forsberg. Philip Forsberg's not happy. They're getting rid of his buddies left and right. And they got to help Roman Josi too. I mean, they can't rely on Roman Josi to do everything. So Matt Duchene is my pick.
I am pulling up just so that I don't, because I noticed when I was looking at the Arizona Coyotes roster, the site that I was using, which will remain nameless, but you can probably guess it because it's got 4 letters. They still had Alex Goligoski on the roster, and I'm like, I don't think he's still with them. So, and yeah, this is not going to help either because turns out CBS Sports is taking cues from ESPN and is doing the exact same thing.
Daily Face-Off is your go-to, Seth, for you in the future.
Good call. I don't need the roster for this because it's pretty widely expected that Arizona is going to be last in the Central.
Yeah.
And so you can find the names on your own. The X factor is whoever takes that goalie position for Arizona because no Darcy Kemper anymore. And they have kind of a hodgepodge, a ragtag bunch of guys. I believe Aiden Hill is one of them still, or maybe he
got traded to San Jose.
That's what it was. Yeah, whoever takes the goalie spot,
could be a nightmare.
Open competition.
Yeah.
Whoever takes that is going to help this team tremendously. No goalie play. At last finish in the division. Arizona is. Sorry, Coyotes fans. It's going to be a rough season.
The one bright spot they have is Jacob Chikrin. I think he has the potential to be a top 10 defenseman in the league, top 5. The way he's going. He's the one interesting thing is, Michael Russo talked to him, and Jacob Trickman said, because that was his D partner for the past couple of seasons, and he said he's really, really going to miss Alex Goligoski as a D partner. So, that's one of the lone bright spots that they have on that team, and I hope he can stay there a long time because he's so fun to watch. I mean, he's one of the leading goal scorers as a defenseman in the league, and he skates like the wind, can play in all different types of situations. And of course, they still have the thrill, Phil Kessel. Talk about a guy, talk about a place, the perfect place for Phil. He has no media attention on him. He can do whatever the hell he wants and still put up 25. Like it's nothing. It doesn't look like he's in shape ever, and he still goes out and scores. That's just Phil, and he's an amazing quote. So I love the guy. It's so fun to root for him. And he's in a media market where he's not going to get any pressure if he's not scoring.
Yeah, he can just snipe goals and just sling hot dogs like all week long, and just like you said, there is something to be said about as kind of like that last lap of your career, having really no sort of media pressure. It's quite liberating, I would imagine.
Right. You don't have to worry about trying to win a Stanley Cup in Arizona because it's not going to happen.
No, it's probably not. But that's the Central Division for you. X Factor players for each of the teams in the Central. And if you were paying attention to the order, it went a little something like this: Minnesota Wilds, Colorado Avalanche. We then went Chicago, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Dallas, Nashville, Arizona. Take that for what you will. Maybe it means that I think the Wild get first place in the Central. I don't know, but we'll just have to wait and see. Alex, thank you for joining the show as always. Again, if you didn't see it on Twitter, Alex is going to be a regular contributor for Locked On Wild for the 2021-2022 season, so we are thrilled about that. Micheletti Mondays, just a real good way to get the week started. So looking forward to that very much. Make sure to follow Alex at Alex Micheletti on Twitter. You can see it on the screen on YouTube. So make sure to give him a follow. Yeah. Oh yeah. This is some nice little production value that we've got here. So make sure to give Alex a follow. Make sure, now that you're done with your first listen of the day, to head on over to Locked On NHL to get a little better sense of the rest of the league through the preseason as we get closer to the start of the regular season, which is now a little over 2 weeks away. So very excited for that. Make sure to check out Locked On NHL, and make sure to follow Locked On Wilds wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can find new episodes of Locked On Wild every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.